The original just spoke to me as this brilliant coming of age story, but also in terms of its feminism. I feel like that's where I sort of found my whole sort of like voice.
Yeah.
Was that what sort of connected to you, where you felt like this was your moment to sort of contemporize it? There was so much to sort of update.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think for me, the thing that kind of surprisingly made it feel so personal was that it was this sibling love story, and to be the oldest of four, also, I just really related to Tanya, Sue Ellen. Like, it just made me kind of think about my siblings and want to call my siblings. And then I think the update aspect of it, is that this movie was always about kids being forced to be adults before their time. And, we know that that's true for all Black kids, so it's like the fact that we were able to center a Black family with this story made it feel all the more relevant.
Speaking of modernizing it, the original, I'm sure you got this all day. The original was PG-13. This turned to R. Even though they're doing like all the same sort of things. Like, what, first of all, what's up with that? Second of all, like, do you feel like this limits your audience? Like, people don't really pay attention to ratings anyways, I think these days.
Well, you are only the second person out of quite a lot of people that to bring this up. So thank you for bringing it up. And yeah, what is up with that? I don't know. I couldn't tell you, to be honest, besides the fact that we're Black, I mean, like, what else is there to talk about it besides the fact that maybe the MPA and kind of American parents have gotten more conservative over the years. I mean, the excuse that we were given was that's the case, like Bad News Bears, which was PG, would be R today. But I got to be honest, like when I was looking at what they said was like happening in this movie, and they were like, "Oh, Fat Blunt is here," it would be like, Fat Blunt. Like, I'm confused as to why there are literal horror movies and like awful violence that we allow our 13-year-olds to see, and that there's like one female sexual reference, by the way, and like, is that what pushed you over the edge? Like, talk about feminism. It was baffling to us. Thankfully, yes, our partners were kind of like what you thought, which was, Iconic was like, look, we believe in this movie. We don't want to change this movie at all. And we think that hopefully kids are buying stuff online and they'll come see it. But we definitely have to figure out ways to get the message out that like people can take their families to go see this movie, because it's absolutely a family movie. And like, sure, don't bring your 8-year-old, but like your 13-year-old can absolutely come see this film.
Um, I was so curious. Did you film in the same exact house
We filmed in
as
this.
the original?
Yes, we did. I think like we really wanted to be in conversation with the original. We wanted to be, in such deep gratitude and homage to what the original did and was doing. And I feel like that also allowed us to be freer kind of with tone and with, just in general with making this about a Black family. So yeah, the producers, when I came on, they were like, hey, so we have actually been talking to the person who owns the original house. Would that be something that interests you? And obviously, usually remakes like want to distance themselves so much and be completely different. And I was kind of like, well, that sounds like that might be actually really fun. And something tickled me about the idea of like a Black family 30 years later in the same house having the same wild story happen to them. So that I just kind of followed that impulse.
Well, I love it too because it sort of adds this texture, probably to the performances and the filming too. Like if those walls could talk, like, you know,
1,000%. A
yeah.
1,000%.
And the way you sort of deploy sort of these, and I don't mean it in the pejorative, like these nostalgia bombs, like was it sort of a trick, a magic trick to know where exactly to do the squeeze zoom, like the iconic squeeze zoom, or where to throw in the right line, or where to like how you have it edited in certain sequences, or like even like the score, using the score again?
Yeah. So, I think when it comes to the lines, so much of that goes to Chuck Hayward, who wrote the script, who loves the movie so much and was very kind of staunch about wanting to have those lines in there. I think when it came to the filmic language, again, I really wanted to be in conversation with it. And so I was like, there's so much fun that's being had with the camera in this movie. And so we should do that. And then we should also do more with it, continue that dialogue. And so that was the goal for me, to really be able to do that. And I also think, like, when I'm approaching making a movie, I sort of think about, like, what would a movie look like if a director directed this movie? And for me, it was like, what if John Singleton directed Ferris Bueller? How would that look? How would that feel? And so all of those things come, or like a Clueless, Amy Heckerling, there's such a youthfulness to the camera. It's so frenetic, it's so moving. And so it just made sense for that to be there, and using some of those really fun, camera things that Steve in the original did. I was like, let's continue this conversation that we're having.
Speaking to the youthfulness aspect of this, the soundtrack is really, really great in your film. And it's one of the things in the original too that spoke to sort of this youthful spirit that a lot of people don't really talk about. Can you sort of talk about how you use the soundtrack to sort of like
Yeah.
their
Well,
layer?
two things. I mean, first off, you mentioned the score. Obviously, we used the score in a very particular moment. It's not like we used the score through the whole one, but
Right.
but I wanted the score to be very kind of like these kind of classic Home Alone, John Williams-y things, because again, I don't think that we get that as often, that kind of score for Black films. And so that was the sort of approach that we took with the composer. And then when it came to the music, the edict in general was like, let's not try to be hyper contemporary, and let's not try to be nostalgic. Let's take things from both of those things, but do what feels right. And that sort of existed in the wardrobe, and that very much existed in the music. We worked with Interscope, and they had just a great library of music that got sent our way that we use. And then there were also, the throwback songs were things that I had had in my head and that I just loved, and that we were able to get cleared. So we had this really kind of covering a lot of ground musically in this movie that I was just hoping was going to feel cohesive. And I because I think that was in the original, like it was just sort of like wild in its palette.
Mm-hmm. I love your cast too. I think they're so phenomenal, so talented. How did you bring them all together? They all have to be so great individually and then also as a cohesive ensemble too. The kids are just phenomenal.
Their chemistry makes this movie, absolutely. And again, I think that was part of what Chuck did with the update, which was to, there's this idea of like being Black is not a monolith, right?
Right.
There's a lot of different ways to be Black, and he embodied that with these four very different Black kids. And
Mhm.
so I wanted to really lean into that and find kids that felt different, but also that's what families look like, right? Like they look different and they feel different. And so obviously starting with Simone Joy Jones, who just embodied this, speaking of like a John Hughesian kind of feel, and this ingenue, she just really was so playful and buoyant, but also emotional, and can kind of handle those things too. And I think that energy trickled down to the kids. And then of course there's Nicole Richie, who is just like a revelation to me in this movie. I mean, I was aware of her more as a personality than an actor, but when we first met and started talking, and we were talking about Rosalind Russell and His Girl Friday, and like this kind of Howard Hawks like quick fire speak, and she just brought so many ideas, and she was just really, really excited to play and just kind of go there. And then of course there's June Squibb. She was the one person who was attached before I came on, and I just thank my lucky stars that she was there. But yeah, there's Miles Fowler, there's Tyreek Withers, who's starring in a new Jordan Peele movie. Like, I really do think time will tell even more so of like how phenomenal this cast is.
Mhm. I'll end on this one. I feel like the original sort of got thrown under the bus by a lot of white male critics. And
Mm.
if you were to like, what would be the thing you want people to take away from your film in
Yeah.
your
Wow, I didn't know the specificity of that, or sort of why it got kind of thrown under the bus in the beginning. But I do see this film as a way to rectify that, because we are so true to the original story. It is sort of like we've been saying, a continuation of that. I would say, look, this film is a sibling love story, like we've talked about. That's what this movie is. It's a sibling love story wrapped in an adventure comedy, with a Black family. And so if you're interested in that, if you're interested in being on a ride with a lot of really good music, then come see it, because we could use your support.
Oh, and the most important thing, if we're not alone, and I ask you for something, you just say,